Welcome to Insights with Dr. Val-Addo, and thank you so much for watching our previous presentations and for joining us once again. This presentation is the 10th in a series, and my name is Dr. J. Val-Addo. In our immediate previous presentations, we considered how Europeans thought about Africans through the writings of some of their well-known philosophers like David Hume from Scotland, G.W.F. Hegel from Germany, and Herbert Spencer from England. Now, our focus for today's presentation is on Africans on the Guinea coast and sincere Europeans. Africans in the Guinea coast and sincere Europeans. Now, I want to give a prelude on Africa from the thoughts and writing of the German philosopher G.W.F. Hegel. He was born in 1770 and died in 1830. In his writing, he divided Africa into three parts. One, Africa proper, he called it Africa proper, referring to the territory south of the Sahara. And then what he called number two is the European Africa. He referred that to the north of the Sahara for the northern African countries. And then number three is the region of the Nile, referring to it having connection with Asia. So this European philosopher from Germany divided Africa into three parts. Once again, he called it Africa proper, which is all Africans or part of the Africa, the larger part of it, which is in the south of the Sahara. And then European Africa, referring to the north of the Sahara, that is the North African countries, which were initially influenced by Europeans like the Romans and others. And then the third division was the region of the Nile River, to the eastern part of it, under Egypt down to Ethiopia, and from the eastern part of Africa, from Kenya and to Ethiopia up to Egypt. I think that is the third region, and he refers to this part of Africa as having connection with Asia. So one, the northern part has connection with Europe, the eastern part along the Nile has connection to Asia, but he never made any connection of the South Saharan region, the larger part of Africa, to any other people. Now, his purpose for the division was to have a springboard to write a subjective philosophy, what he thinks, because one of the region has link with Europe, so he considered them to be different. Another link with another region with Asia, he considered them to be different. But the region, the greater part of Africa, south of the Sahara, didn't have any link with Europe, nor Asia, nor any other country. And so he wanted to use his division as a springboard to write his ideas about philosophy of history about Africans living in this part of the continent. And we will note that he wrote a law to degenerate them, or to degrade them, to destroy them, to say things which were not right. Now, so Hegel's focus of attack was evidently on Africa and Africans south of the Sahara, the people described as dark Africans. I won't call them blacks. I won't call them black Africans, because I don't want to use the word, the description black, but dark Africans. Now, this was the part of Africa and the people of Africa whom he was going to attack in his philosophy. Now, let's look at Hegel's description of Africa south of the Sahara, how he described them, and I'm going to quote about three parts of his writing about Africa to indicate how he described Africa. One, quote, he said, Africa, south of the Sahara, is the land of childhood, which, lying beyond the day of self-conscious history, is enveloped in the dark mantle of night. Now, what he means is the land of childhood. It means this part of Africa, which is south of the Sahara, where the dark Africans live, was like a boy, like a child. That is beyond a day of self-consciousness or self-conscious history. It means that it is like a child that is born that is not conscious of the world, and so doesn't have any history, and is enveloped in the dark mantle of night. That means that there is a mantle of darkness around these people and this portion of Africa. Now, what he means by that, and I quote, is that the Negro life had not yet attained to the realization of any substantial objective existence, unquote. What he means by this is that they are not conscious of their existence and they have not realized anything. Now, he went further to use some unsavory choice of words which were not savory, words which were not proper to describe them. And he said the Negro or the African, quote, was natural man in his completely wild and untamed state. So he saw all the people living in this region of Africa south of the Sahara as people who are natural people in their completely wild and untamed state. That means they were wild, they were untamed. Now, this is how this German philosopher described the people. Now, we want to ask the question, were this true in history, so that we can judge his kind of history and his philosophy, his mode of logic, reasoning, and wisdom. We want to judge it after he has said all this kind of unsavory things about the people living in this part of the region of the continent. Now, I therefore had to do a research, and my research document was published in 1771, and it was published a year after Hegel was born. Hegel was born in 1770, and this particular document was published in 1771, and it was just a year different from when Hegel was born. And it was by an European by name Anthony Benezet. Anthony Benezet. Now, Anthony Benezet was born in France, an European country, but for some reason, he migrated to Holland and then went to England before he moved to the United States of America, lived in Pennsylvania, and that is where he died, getting to the end of the 1700s. So when he came to the US, he joined the Quakers group. It is a Christian group that migrated from Britain and lived in this part of America, which is Pennsylvania area. Now, the focus of the writing of this research book is the historical accounts of the Guinea coast. Now, the Guinea coast, is the Gulf of the Guinea. And the Gulf of the Guinea starts from Senegal, and then it goes down to South Africa. Now, and so they focus on the historical accounts of the Guinea coast. All the coast, the people living in the Guinea coast, from Senegal in West Africa to the Cape of Good Hope, the tip of South Africa is where we call the Cape of the Good Hope. So from the western part of Africa, from Senegal, you can look at your map from West Africa, Senegal, and then you can trace all the way to West Africa, to Central Africa, and to Southern Africa. So this is the historical account that he gathered, and he gathered from people who had traveled to these coastal areas and observed the people living in those areas in the 18th century. That is before the 1482, where the Portuguese were the first people to come to that coastal land and came to Gold Coast, actually. So I believe the account starts from when European countries and European travelers set out to these coastal towns. And they had the Grain Coast, the Ivory Coast, the Gold Coast, and the Slave Coast. So they gave certain names to these coastal countries or coastal settlements. And so they specifically went there. And then I tried to examine the reliability of the historical accounts. How reliable were the accounts, the historical account about the people living in these coastal areas from Senegal all the way down to West African countries, to Nigeria, then come down to the Central African countries, and then to the South African countries, to the Cape of the Good Hope. And that was where. How reliable were they? Now, this document, which I was researching in, seemed to be reliable because he referred to documentation of accounts of travels of Europeans to most of these Guinea coasts, including but not limited to 1728 travels and 1735 travels. Now that means that some of the accounts of the travels in 1726, which were recorded and referred to in this document that I was researching in, was 44 years before Hegel, who made all these statements, was born. And then another travel and writing about the Guinea coast was conducted 35 years before Hegel, who was writing about the south of Africa and the people that living there. It was written 35 years before he was born. So we have documents and writings of Europeans who traveled there 44 years before Hegel was born and 35 years before Hegel was born. Now, this is my summation of the document, and it's a summary of eyewitness account. That means people really observed, and from their observation, they wrote about what they saw in the Guinea coast, as I have described. So I observed from reading this book, this document that I was researching from, which was written in the 1700s, the nature of Africans, the personality of Africans, the dignity of Africans living in that region, and how they coexisted, how they lived together, and the beauty of the places, the coastal areas that they lived or they resided. How was it? What was how does the environment look like? And how they governed themselves, the order they maintained, the morality they maintained. And so this goes through the documentation. And this is what, when I researched and read through and look at the citations, I could gather. Now, so I will be starting today with the nature of the people of the coastlands of the Western and Central Africa, from Senegal up to the Cape of Good Hope, especially about Congo and then Angola. That is, well, the nature of the people that were living all the way from Senegal to Congo and Angola as part of the focused area. First, I want us to look at what I read about Ivory Coast. Now, there was a Dutch traveler, somebody from Denmark, who traveled, and he wrote down something when he visited Ivory Coast. He found the inhabitants of Ivory Coast, and I quote, to be civil and good-natured. He said that the people, he was from Denmark, an European country, and he said he found the inhabitants of Ivory Coast to be civil and good-natured. That is something wonderful that he observed. Now, he further described the king of Rio Cestro, that is in the lower part of Ivory Coast, down to the lower part of Ivory Coast, as, and I quote, a very agreeable, obliging man, and all his subjects were civil, unquote. This is what this Dutch wrote about the king of Rio Cestro and his subjects or his citizens. He also spoke, quote, in recommendation of the civility, kindness, and great industry of the natives of Hueda, unquote. Now, this is part of the coastal land, and he continued to give a high commendation of the civility, the kindness, and the great industry of the natives of this coastal town. Now, this is an European giving such a recommendation, a Dutch. Then, the Dutch were not the only people who traveled. We know almost all the European countries sent sailors and travelers. So the British also sent people around 1726, and there was a British traveler and author who confirmed what the Dutch person also said. And he wrote down in his account, and I quote, the natives here, that is in Hueda, seem to be most gentle men-like Negroes in the Guinea, abounding with good manners and ceremony to each other. Now, that means he was describing them as people who were abounding in good manners and ceremony. They were the most, to him, to the British, they were the most gentle men-like Negroes in the Guinea. When we say the Guinea, is the Guinea coast. And so that is unquote. Then there was the account of the kingdom of Benin. And Benin is, after the Gold Coast, you go to Togo, and from Togo, you have Benin. And it was a kingdom when they visited there. And in the European collection of voyages, that is one of the documents, I quote, they are a sincere, inoffensive people and do not do no injustice either to one another or to strangers. I want to quote again. In the European collection of voyages, they describe the people living in the kingdom of Benin, and I quote, "They are sincere, inoffensive people and do no injustice either to one another or to strangers." And the strangers were the Europeans which visited them. And they didn't do any injustice to them. Neither did they do any injustice to their own people. And I just want to share this account. Now, the British traveler and the author also wrote again, and I quote, "The inhabitants are generally very good-natured and exceeding courteous and civil." So the Europeans were using all these adjectives to describe the people they found on the Guinea Coast, whether in Ivory Coast, in Gold Coast, in the Kingdom of Benin. This is how they described them. And there was another person from Europe, and he was from France, and he was an agent general of the French African Company. You know, when they were reaching out, they formed companies to sail to these parts of Africa. And the French had French African Company, and their agent general wrote this. He said the inhabitants were civil and good-natured. And he said that to confirm what the collection of voyages written by an European and by the British, he confirmed them that the people were. So it was not one person writing, but people from other European countries who visited these parts of Africa on the coastal land, the Guinea coast. They wrote good things. They didn't compare notes, but after all this came into writing, people who assembled them together and read it saw that they had written good things about the people living in this part of the continent of Africa. Now, concerning the kingdoms of Congo and Angola, down to the, from Nigeria, you go to Cameroon, and you go to Congo, and you go to Angola. As part of the coastal land that they were involved in. Now, a European in collection of voyages wrote something, and I want to quote, "The natives are generally a quiet people who discover a good understanding and behave in a friendly manner to strangers, being of mild conversation, affable." That means when they are talking, they are mild, they are nice people, and they are generally quiet people, and they discover good understanding quickly. They were they were insightful. Immediately these Europeans talked to them, and they behaved in a friendly manner to strangers, and they were very mild in their conversation, and they were affable. Now, it's amazing, a European writer is describing Africans south of the Sahara as people of insight to understand the Europeans. Even though there was the language barrier, language differences, these people could observe their character, that this is the behavior of these people. Now, he could not hide his impression of the intuitive distinctiveness of the people of Congo and Angola. Yet, Hegel made derogatory statements about Africans living south of the Sahara. Yet, David Hume said he was apt to suspect the Negroes to be naturally inferior and in comparison with whites. He was a man of suspicion. He accepted, he admitted that he was apt to suspect that the Negroes to be naturally inferior. It was a suspicion, and suspicion is an inner moral decay that destroys a person's integrity and blinds him spiritually and intellectually. Now, because of the limitation of time, the information for this presentation was abridged, just abridged. But you can, understand that I've done enough to present the documentation to describe the nature of the people living in the Guinea coast. But you can get more of it and citations from my book, The Rise of Africa, The Rise of Africans and African Descent to Reign in Life, Volume 1, Redeeming Africa. And I want you to be ready to get your copy as we release them. So I want to share 3 messages from this presentation. Now, the first message is, 1, if you won't praise me, don't spoil me. And I'm quoting this. It's a popular saying by some Africans that if you won't praise me, don't spoil me. That is what Africans say, because some of these Europeans are trying not to praise Africans, even though some of their own travelers as eyewitnesses, having interaction with the people and observing things, give a real praise of the people living in the place. But those who were not there could write derogatory statements about Africans. So the Holy Writ says a good name is better than riches. The general human nature of Africans is better because it does not tilt towards extreme moral decay or depravity. That is the nature of Africa is not all that bad. It is a good nature that they inherit on the whole. That is the general nature. And then I want to tell you an inscription that I saw some time ago on an African boat on the coast. And then the same on an African commercial vehicle. It says, travel and see. That means when you travel, you see a lot of things. And I remember when I was in college, one of my lecturers used to tell us that you need to travel. Students need to travel. And when you are traveling, it changes your mind. You understand people. You see people. Now, those Europeans who were able to travel to these coastal lands of Africa give a different positive impression than those who never traveled. Now, Europeans who travel to the Guinea coast of Africa, the Grain Coast, the Ivory Coast, the Gold Coast, and other coastal lands south of the Sahara are true, sincere, and trusted witnesses to dark Africans living on their own lands. Now, those who were acquainted with only the vicinities of Europe describe Africans living in this area in derogatory terms. If certain armchair European historians and philosophers will not accept the reliable historical account given out by their own people who are traveled there, Africans should disregard their shallowness with all the contempt that it deserves. They should ignore them and not, they don't deserve to be paid attention to. We don't have to pay attention to them. Now, let me take up the message 2. We need to be proud African, especially if you are from the south of the Sahara and you are dark in complexion. We have a good nature. What are we to be proud of? The general, less defiled African nature is amazing. Our nature is less defiled. And we need to walk with our chest out. The African nature does not tilt towards extreme moral decay. These Europeans testified of who Africans are. And Africans, in a summary, are nice people. They are fine people. Message number 3 is we must be sincere, truthful, and trusted people, trusted witnesses like the Europeans who traveled and gathered all these historical accounts and wrote about them. In our next presentation, we will look at the African personality and dignity from these sincere, truthful, and trusted European witnesses that we can all rely upon, because we've covered the African nature. And so we'll look at how they describe the African personality and African dignity, because you cannot separate the African personality and dignity from the nature of the African. And since we've known the African, we will also quote from this document that I was researching from, written by the sincere, truthful, trusted European witnesses, and look at the African personality and dignity. Give us a thumb up if this presentation has been an eye-opener to you. And to continue receiving insights with Dr. Val-Addo, please click the subscribe button and click the share symbol to send to others, and write a comment below it if you have any. God bless.